The modern gig economy has turned pet sitting into an incredibly popular side hustle. You get paid to hang out with a dog or cat while staying in a massive, beautiful home. On paper, it sounds like the perfect job. But there is a hidden psychological cost to staying in a house that doesn't belong to you. You are completely removed from your normal environment. You don't control the variables, you don't recognize the structure's sounds, and you don't know the neighbors. You're entirely vulnerable to your surroundings. We can see how a home's security is actually structured using this animated diagram. Safety is built on a series of failing boundaries, moving from the outside in. It starts with the perimeter, moves to the threshold, drops to the breach, and finally, the inner sanctum. Tonight, we'll look at 4 true stories, tracking a threat as it bypasses each ring, stepping closer to the house's center. Stepping into a stranger's home means you are inheriting their specific, unknown vulnerabilities. This visual represents our first stage. The sitter in our first story was completely isolated in a remote cabin with no neighbors for miles. The initial warning sign came when the high-energy dog suddenly bared its teeth, growling viciously at a dark window pane for no apparent reason. The sitter crept closer and delicately moved the curtain, peering through a tiny crack. Standing out in the yard, perfectly still, was a man in a long trench coat. He was staring directly at the house. For 10 agonizing minutes, it was a dead silent staring contest. The man never broke his gaze. When the sitter checked the window again later, the man had physically moved across the lawn, but his eyes were still locked entirely on the exact window where the narrator was hiding. At this first stage, the perimeter, the physical boundary of the house holds. The stalker remains outside, but the absolute physical isolation amplifies the sheer psychological terror of being watched. Our second story moves us to a suburban home and introduces a digital precursor. Before any physical contact, the sitter started receiving bizarre notifications on their phone from a fake social media account with a blurry profile picture. Then, the threat escalated to the physical world. While standing in the kitchen, the sitter watched the front door handle slowly start to move. It wasn't a violent rattle. The person on the outside was slowly, deliberately turning the doorknob back and forth. A few moments later, they moved to the back door and performed the exact same test. When the sitter checked their camera app, they saw a man standing on the porch, waiting in the dark with a wide, unnatural smile. He vanished before the police arrived, but he left one final message on that fake social media account. "Miss you already." Here at the threshold stage, the threat profile changes. The stalker is no longer passively observing. They are actively putting their hands on the house, probing its armor for a weak point. Our third case study happens at a rural estate around 1 a.m. The sitter was awake when a loud crashing noise echoed from the back of the house. The physical locks had failed. Grabbing a flashlight to investigate, the sitter walked down a long, narrow hallway. Out of the shadows stepped a man wearing a black sweatshirt and a flannel, calmly claiming he was a security guard for the property. The intruder didn't attack. Instead, he used a smooth, confident voice, calling the narrator silly for asking questions. He gestured toward the dark stairs, trying to convince the sitter to follow him down into the pitch-black basement. The sitter recognized the lie and sprinted for the front door. When a breach occurs, the immediate danger is often psychological rather than physical. Intruders use deception, gaslighting, and manipulation to trap a disoriented victim who doesn't realize the boundary has already fallen. The final story takes place in a massive, historic county home. The building was filled with dark wood and the heavy, musty smell of age. For the first 2 nights, the house was completely quiet, creating a deep, false sense of security. That illusion broke on the 3rd night. The sitter walked into the kitchen for a late-night snack and found a fresh series of Polaroids scattered across the kitchen counter. They hadn't been there a few hours prior. Looking closely at the photos, the sitter saw a blurry figure asleep in a bed. It was them. Someone had been standing right inside their guest room the night before, documenting them while they were completely helpless and asleep. This is the inner sanctum, the ultimate horror of the shrinking circle. The threat bypassed the perimeter, the threshold, and the breach completely undetected, leaving the victim entirely defenseless while unconscious. We build physical walls to keep ourselves safe, and we rely on multiple rings of security to give us time to react. But those boundaries only function if we actually know who is on the outside. Entering an empty, unfamiliar house creates a vacuum of safety. Because you don't know the environment, that vacuum will inevitably be filled by whatever or whoever was already hiding inside. If you want to explore more true stories like these, make sure to subscribe and turn on notifications so you never miss a midnight upload. And if you have a terrifying encounter of your own, send it to the email in the description. Just make sure it's a raw, human-written account, completely untouched by AI. I want to read your actual words because the truth is always scarier. Stay safe out there.